The alarms had been screaming for 3 hours straight. Red emergency lights bathed the command center of Haven Station in bloody shadows as reports flooded in from across the battlefield. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood before the massive tactical display, watching humanity's final fleet slowly die in the cold vacuum of space. 37 ships. That was all that remained of the once mighty Terran Defense Force. Just months ago, they had commanded over 300 vessels across 12 star systems. Now those systems were ash and rubble, consumed by the unstoppable advance of the hegemony war machine. The enemy fleet stretched across the void like a plague of locusts. 200 biomechanical vessels moved with perfect coordination, their living hulls pulsing with alien energy. These ships could repair themselves in the middle of battle, growing new armor plating where human weapons tore holes in their sides. Every engagement was a losing proposition for humanity. Torres watched another human destroyer vanish in a flash of superheated plasma. The Resilient had been one of their best ships, commanded by an old friend from the Academy. Now it was expanding, debris and cooling metal, another monument to humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender. "Admiral, the evacuation is at 60% complete," reported Lieutenant Collins from the communication station. His voice cracked with exhaustion and barely controlled fear. "The civilian transports need another 15 minutes to clear. The station's gravity well. 15 minutes. Torres almost laughed at the impossibility of it. Her remaining ships were barely holding together now. The heavy cruiser Defiance was venting atmosphere from 3 hull breaches. The destroyer squadron, under Commander Liu, was down to 2 functional vessels. Even the mighty battleship Indomitable was running on backup power after taking a direct hit to its main reactor. The hegemony forces pressed their advantage with mechanical precision. Their tactics were always the same: overwhelming firepower, applied at the weakest points until human resistance crumbled. They had perfected this approach over countless worlds, leaving behind empty planets stripped of all useful resources. But Haven Station was different. This wasn't just another human colony to be harvested. This was the last major population center outside the Sol system itself. Over 2 million civilians packed into evacuation ships, fleeing toward Earth with whatever they could carry. These were the survivors of a dozen fallen worlds, the final remnant of humanity's brief expansion into the stars. Torres activated her command communicator, broadcasting to every ship in the fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Torres. I won't lie to you about our situation. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. But those transports behind us carry the future of our species. Every second we buy them is a victory against extinction." The responses came back immediately. Captain Walsh from the Defiance. "Standing by for orders, Admiral. My ship's not pretty, but she'll fight." Commander Liu. "Destroyer Squadron 7 ready to engage. We've got nothing left to lose." Even the captain of the limping freighter Steadfast, armed with nothing but mining lasers. "Count us in, Admiral. We didn't come this far to quit now." That was humanity in a nutshell, Torres reflected, too stubborn to know when they were beaten. The hegemony had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, but they had never encountered anything quite like human determination. Other races surrendered when defeat became inevitable. Humans just got angry and fought harder. The tactical display updated with new enemy movements. The hegemony fleet was repositioning for a final assault, their dreadnoughts moving into attack formation. Bioweapon ports along their hulls began to glow with lethal energy. In 5 minutes, maybe less, they would open fire with enough concentrated firepower to sweep away the human fleet like dust in a hurricane. Torres began calculating firing solutions for a desperate charge. If her ships could penetrate the enemy formation and target their command vessels, they might create enough chaos for the transports to escape. It would be suicide for every human warrior in the battle, but the civilians would live to fight another day. The thought of Earth standing alone against the hegemony armada filled her with cold dread. The home system's defenses were strong, but not strong enough to hold off 200 enemy ships. When Haven Station fell, the war would effectively be over. Humanity would make their last stand around their birth world, and then there would be silence where once a young species had dreamed of touching the stars. All ships prepare for attack run Alpha, Torres commanded. We're going to punch a hole right through their center line, target their command vessels, and keep firing until there's nothing left to shoot with. Her captains acknowledged the order without question. They all knew what it meant. In the old days, naval commanders would have called it a death ride, a last, glorious charge against impossible odds. The only difference was that this time, the fate of an entire species hung in the balance. The human fleet began to move forward, accelerating toward the enemy formation with desperate courage. Weapons, systems came online across 37 ships. Every missile, every energy cannon, every piece of military hardware humanity had managed to salvage from their defeated colonies prepared to speak with one final voice. Torres closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her daughter safe on Earth, hopefully growing up in a world where the nightmare of the hegemony was just a story from history books. When she opened them again, the enemy fleet had moved into optimal firing range. All ships, attack formation, give them hell. The space around Haven Station erupted into deadly light as humanity's last fleet charged toward oblivion. Plasma beams and missile salvos crossed the void in both directions, turning the battlefield into a maze of destruction and heroism. The Defiance took hits that would have destroyed a smaller vessel, but kept fighting. Commander Lu's destroyers danced through enemy fire like deadly ballerinas, striking fast and disappearing behind debris fields. But the mathematics of the battle were unforgiving. For every enemy ship damaged, humanity lost 2 of their own. The formation was already beginning to collapse when space itself seemed to shimmer near the edge of the battlefield. Something vast was stirring in the darkness between the stars, something that would change everything. Admiral Torres never expected to see reinforcements. Humanity had no allies in this cold galaxy, no friends to call upon in their darkest hour. Yet as she watched, reality twisted, and a shape began to emerge from nothingness itself, as if the universe had decided to offer one final surprise in the last moments of human resistance. The universe held its breath as something impossible happened in the void around Haven Station. Space twisted like heated glass, bending light in ways that made veteran officers question their sanity. Emergency klaxons fell silent as every sensor, operator stared at readings that defied explanation. Lieutenant Collins was the first to find his voice. Admiral, we're detecting a massive spatial distortion off our starboard flank. Energy readings they're off the charts, ma'am. Torres turned from the tactical display where moments ago she had been orchestrating humanity's final charge. The shimmer in space was growing stronger, more defined. Whatever was emerging from that rippling darkness was enormous beyond comprehension. Even the hegemony fleet had stopped their advance, their biomechanical ships turning sensors toward the anomaly, with something that looked almost like fear. The distortion collapsed inward on itself, then exploded outward in a cascade of silver light. When the brilliance faded, a warship floated in the void where empty space had been seconds before. But calling it a warship seemed inadequate, like calling a hurricane a strong wind. The vessel stretched nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull constructed from materials that seemed to drink starlight and reflect it back in impossible patterns. Crystalline structures grew along its surface like living geometry, pulsing with internal light that shifted through colors humanity had no names for. The ship moved with fluid grace that defied its massive size, as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions in its presence. "What in God's name is that thing?" whispered Commander Lu over the communications channel. Her remaining destroyers had stopped their attack run, hanging motionless in space as their crews struggled to process what they were seeing. Torres found herself equally speechless. In 30 years of military service, she had seen humanity's most advanced warships and the terrifying biotechnology of the hegemony fleet. This vessel belonged to neither category. It was something entirely new, or perhaps something incredibly old that had been hiding in the dark spaces between stars. The hegemony response was swift and violent. Their formation shifted with mechanical precision, abandoning their planned assault on the human fleet to focus on this new threat. Energy readings spiked across every sensor as bioweapon ports began charging with lethal purpose. Whatever this crystalline ship represented, the enemy clearly considered it a far greater danger than humanity's desperate last stand. The mysterious vessel positioned itself directly between the two fleets, neither advancing nor retreating. It simply held position like a guardian angel made of starlight and impossible mathematics. No aggressive moves, no weapons powered, no threatening gestures. Just presence, as if its mere existence was statement enough. The Hegemony flagship, a massive dreadnought that had personally overseen the destruction of 6 human worlds, made the first hostile move. A bioplasma beam lanced out across the void, the same weapon that had melted through human shields like paper and turned proud starships into expanding clouds of superheated gas. The crystalline vessel's response was immediate and devastating. Beams of pure coherent energy erupted from weapons ports that hadn't been visible seconds before, each shot placed with surgical precision. The plasma beam that should have carved through the alien ship's hull simply vanished, absorbed or redirected by defensive systems beyond human understanding. Then came the return fire. 6 Hegemony cruisers died in the first volley, their biomechanical hulls unable to regenerate fast enough to counter weapons that seemed to unmake matter at the molecular level. The enemy formations staggered like a boxer taking an unexpected uppercut, their perfect coordination shattered by the sudden reversal of fortune. Torres watched in amazement as the battle transformed from humanity's funeral dirge into something resembling hope. The mysterious ship carved through the Hegemony fleet with methodical efficiency, but there was something almost familiar about its tactics. The way it moved, the timing of its attacks, the strategic positioning. It all spoke of military experience and careful planning. "Admiral," Collins called out, his voice tight with excitement and confusion. "We're receiving a transmission on all human frequencies. Audio only, but the signal is crystal clear." The voice that emerged from the speakers was distinctly female, speaking English with an accent Torres couldn't place. It sounded almost human, but with subtle inflections that suggested different vocal structures, or perhaps years of speaking in an alien environment. "Human vessels, this is Captain Nora Thane of the Starship Wanderer. Apologies for the dramatic entrance, but we've been tracking this Hegemony force for 3 weeks. We're here to even the odds." The command center erupted in confused murmurs. Torres raised her hand for silence, then activated her own transmitter. "Captain Thane, this is Admiral Rebecca Torres of the Terran Defense Force. We appreciate the assistance, but we need to know who you are and what your intentions are." Thane's response came back immediately, accompanied by another devastating salvo that reduced 2 more enemy ships to glowing debris. "Long story, Admiral, and we're a bit busy at the moment. Suggest you pull your ships back to defensive positions around the station. This particular Hegemony task force has some nasty surprises, and I'd rather not lose any more human vessels today." The casual way she said "any more human vessels" sent a chill down Torres' spine. How long had this Captain Thane been watching human battles? How many other engagements had she witnessed without intervening? But questions could wait. The Wanderer was systematically dismantling the Hegemony fleet, with weapons technology that made human military science look like stone knives and bearskins. Enemy dreadnoughts that had shrugged off concentrated human fire were being reduced to scrap metal by single shots from the crystalline warship. The remaining Hegemony forces began a fighting withdrawal, their biomechanical ships clustering together for mutual protection. But protection was a relative concept when facing weapons that could apparently ignore conventional defenses. The Wanderer pursued them with relentless precision, each attack perfectly calculated to maximize damage while minimizing the enemy's ability to respond. In less than 20 minutes, the tide of battle had completely reversed. The unstoppable Hegemony armada was either retreating in disorder or burning in the void. Human ships that had been preparing for heroic death charges were now witness to their first major victory against the alien invasion. As the last enemy, vessels disappeared into hyperspace, carrying news of this impossible defeat back to their masters. The Wanderer slowly approached Haven Station. Its crystalline hull had suffered no visible damage despite weathering concentrated fire from dozens of enemy ships. If anything, the mysterious vessel seemed to glow brighter, as if the battle had somehow energized its exotic systems. "Admiral Torres," came Captain Thane's voice again. "Request permission to dock with your station. We have much to discuss and very little time to do it in." The hegemony will return in greater numbers once they report what happened here. Torres looked around her command center at faces filled with hope and confusion in equal measure. Humanity had just been saved by complete strangers wielding incomprehensible technology. Every instinct told her to be suspicious, to demand answers before allowing aliens aboard her station. But the same instincts also whispered that without these mysterious allies, every human in the system would be dead within the hour. Permission granted, Captain Thane. Docking Bay 12 is cleared for your arrival. The docking bay fell silent as Captain Thane's shuttle touched down on Haven Station's landing platform. After 30 minutes of frantic preparation, the reception committee stood ready behind hastily erected security barriers. Admiral Torres had assembled her best people, Commander Lou fresh from her destroyer, Captain Walsh still wearing a pressure suit from emergency repairs on the Defiance, and Lieutenant Collins carrying a portable scanner that probably wouldn't work on alien technology anyway. The shuttle itself defied easy description. Like its mothership, the craft seemed to be constructed from crystalline materials that bent light in impossible directions. It had no visible engines, no obvious weapon ports, no familiar design elements that human engineers might recognize. Yet it had navigated the complex approach to Haven Station with perfect precision, responding to traffic control instructions as if such procedures were routine. A soft hiss announced the opening of an airlock that Torres hadn't even seen until it appeared in the shuttle's smooth hull. The first figure to emerge made her question everything she thought she knew about alien contact protocols. Captain Nora Thane looked remarkably human at first glance. She stood about average height with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and wearing what was clearly a military uniform. But the longer Torres watched, the more differences became apparent. Thane moved with an unusual grace that suggested lower gravity conditions during childhood. Her eyes seemed to hold flecks of actual starlight, and her limbs were subtly elongated in ways that spoke of adaptation to different environments. Behind her came 3 other figures, each displaying similar characteristics. They could have passed for human in a crowd, but careful observation revealed the same telltale signs of different evolutionary pressures. One carried what might have been a weapon, though its design was so foreign that Torres couldn't be certain. Another held a device that hummed with quiet energy, possibly a scanner or communications equipment. Admiral Torres, Thane said, stepping forward with her right hand extended in the universal human gesture of greeting. Thank you for allowing us aboard your station. I realize our arrival was somewhat dramatic. Torres shook the offered hand, noting that Thane's grip was firm, but her skin felt slightly cooler than human normal. Captain Thane, I think dramatic is an understatement. You just saved our entire species from extinction. We're grateful, but we need answers. Of course you do. Thane smiled, and the expression looked genuine despite the subtle differences in her facial structure. Is there somewhere private we can talk? What I'm about to tell you will change your understanding of this galaxy forever. 20 minutes later, they sat in Haven Station's main briefing room around a table scarred by countless emergency meetings. Thane had politely declined offers of food or drink, though she had accepted a cup of coffee and pronounced it remarkably similar to home. Her 3 companions positioned themselves around the room with the casual alertness of experienced soldiers. First, Thane began, you need to understand that the war you've stumbled into has been raging for over 1,000 years. The hegemony isn't some recent threat that discovered humanity by accident. They've been watching your species develop for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike. Torres felt the blood drain from her face. Watching us? For decades? Your expansion into space triggered automatic monitoring systems they've placed around promising worlds. When humans began establishing colonies beyond your solar system, the hegemony marked your species for elimination or absorption. They've done this to hundreds of civilizations across the galaxy. Commander Lou leaned forward, her face grim. Then why did they wait so long to attack? We've been expanding for almost 50 years. Thane's expression grew thoughtful. Because the hegemony believes in efficiency above all else. They prefer to let species develop advanced technology and infrastructure before harvesting them. Your colonies? Your ships, your industrial base, all of it becomes their property once resistance is eliminated. They were waiting for humanity to reach what they consider optimal harvest conditions. But something changed, Torres guessed. Yes. You did. Thane stood and began pacing, her movements fluid and somehow hypnotic. The hegemony has conquered dozens of species using the same basic approach, overwhelming technological superiority, combined with precise application of force at strategic targets. Most civilizations surrender or fragment when they realize resistance is hopeless. She turned to face the assembled human officers. Humans don't surrender. Even when defeat is certain, you keep fighting. Even when your worlds burn and your fleets are destroyed, you adapt and strike back. The hegemony has never encountered anything like human determination, and it terrifies them. Captain Walsh spoke up from his position near the door. So they decided to wipe us out before we could become a bigger problem. Exactly. But they made a critical error in timing. They began their final assault before eliminating all potential threats to their operation. Thane's smile was sharp and predatory. They forgot about us. Who exactly is us? Torres asked. We call ourselves the Architects, though that's just a translation of our actual name. We've been fighting the hegemony for over a millennium, ever since they destroyed our homeworld and scattered our people across the galaxy. We're what you might call a resistance movement, though one with significantly better technology than usual. The implications hit Torres like a physical blow. You're refugees. They did to your people what they're trying to do to us. In a sense, yes, though we've had 1,000 years to prepare for revenge. Thane returned to her seat, her expression growing serious. The hegemony believes they've identified and cataloged every threat in this region of space. They have no idea that architect forces have been building strength in the dark areas between stars, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Lieutenant Collins found his voice for the first time since the meeting began. And humanity represents that moment? Humanity represents something neither the hegemony nor the architects expected. Your species has qualities that make you natural guerrilla fighters on a galactic scale. You're adaptable, unpredictable, and you inspire other species to resist. Oppression. Most importantly, you never accept that a situation is hopeless. Torres studied the alien woman's face, searching for deception or hidden agendas. What do you want from us, Captain Thane? Partnership. The hegemony has grown complacent, after centuries of easy victories. They've never faced coordinated resistance from multiple species working together. Humanity's stubborn courage combined with architect technology could tip the balance of this war for the first time in generations. And if we refuse? Thane's expression grew sad. Then you'll die bravely, but uselessly, and the galaxy will remain under hegemony control for another 1,000 years. They'll eventually track down and eliminate every architect cell, and peace through oppression will be achieved. The briefing room fell silent as the humans absorbed the magnitude of what they were being offered. Alliance with mysterious aliens possessing superior technology, but also permanent involvement in a galactic war that had already lasted longer than recorded human history. Torres looked around the table at her officers. Walsh still bore burn, scars from his ship's battle damage. Liu's uniform showed stains from emergency repairs conducted in zero gravity. Collins looked like he hadn't slept in days. These were people who had already given everything in humanity's defense, and now they were being asked to give even more. But they were also people who had just witnessed impossible victory snatched from certain defeat. The Wanderer had demonstrated that the hegemony could be beaten, that their seemingly invincible war machine had weaknesses that could be exploited. What exactly are you proposing? Torres asked carefully. Thane's smile returned, and this time it held genuine warmth. An end to running and hiding, Admiral. A chance for humanity to stand up and fight back against the forces that want to erase you from the galaxy. But first, we need to get you and your people somewhere safe. The hegemony response to today's defeat is going to be swift and overwhelming. Outside the briefing room windows, the stars beckoned with their ancient light, no longer representing humanity's bright future among the cosmos, but instead a battlefield where the fate of free will itself would be decided. 3 days after the battle at Haven Station, Admiral Torres found herself in a place that didn't officially exist. The architect base hidden in the asteroid field of the Kepler system was a marvel of engineering that made human technology look primitive by comparison. Hollowed-out rocks the size of small moons connected by transport tubes that bent space itself, allowing travel between distant points in seconds rather than hours. Captain Thane had guided the surviving human fleet to this sanctuary through hyperspace routes that defied conventional navigation. The journey itself had been a revelation, as architect ships moved through dimensions that human sensors couldn't detect. Now, surrounded by technology that seemed more like magic than science, Torres was beginning to understand just how outmatched humanity had been from the very beginning. The central command chamber where they now sat could have housed a city. Holographic displays showed star maps covering thousands of light years, with red zones marking hegemony-controlled space and scattered blue points indicating architect cells still fighting their guerrilla war. The scale was overwhelming. Humanity's brief expansion covered a tiny corner of one spiral arm, while the hegemony's domain stretched across half the galaxy. The war began on our homeworld of Avalon, Thane explained, manipulating the display to show a dead system near the galactic core. We were perhaps the first species to develop technology that truly threatened hegemony control. Not just better weapons or faster ships, but something more dangerous, the ability to inspire other races to resist. Torres studied the tactical information flowing across the displays. Troop movements, supply lines, fleet deployments, all of it painted a picture of conflict on an unimaginable scale. How many species are we talking about? The hegemony has absorbed or eliminated over 200 civilizations in the past millennium. Some surrendered and were integrated into their collective. Others fought and were destroyed. A few, like us, managed to escape and continue fighting from the shadows. One of Thane's companions, introduced as Commander Reed, activated a new section of the display. Images of various alien species appeared, each accompanied by data about their home systems and fate under hegemony rule. Some were clearly extinct, their worlds reduced to mining operations or military bases. Others had been transformed into something barely recognizable, their original culture and biology altered to serve hegemony purposes. The process is always the same, Reed explained in a voice that carried deep bitterness. First comes the survey phase, where they study a species and determine its usefulness. Then the softening attacks, designed to weaken resistance and force consolidation of resources. Finally, the harvest, where everything of value is stripped away and the survivors are processed. Lieutenant Collins, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with haunted eyes. Processed, genetic modification, behavioral conditioning, technological implantation. They turned conquered species into specialized tools designed for specific tasks. Some become workers, others become soldiers, a few become researchers. Individual identity is eliminated in favor of collective efficiency. Torres felt sick imagining humanity subjected to such a fate. The very thought of children raised in hegemony breeding facilities, their minds reshaped to serve alien masters, was almost unbearable. But you escape this process, how? Thane's expression grew distant, as if she were looking back across centuries of loss and struggle. We had advantages the other species lacked. Our technology included dimensional manipulation, which allowed us to hide in spaces the hegemony couldn't easily reach. More importantly, we had time to prepare. Our scientists detected their survey operations decades before the first attack. The display shifted to show the evacuation of Avalon, a desperate exodus that had saved perhaps 10% of the architect population. Ships fleeing through dimensional rifts while their homeworld burned behind them, carrying refugees and technology to hidden bases scattered across the galaxy. We spent the first few centuries just surviving, Reed continued. Learning to live in asteroid belts and dead systems, developing new technologies in absolute secrecy. The hegemony thought they had eliminated us completely. When did you start fighting back? Commander Liu asked. About 400 years ago, we made contact with another resistance cell, a species called the Mordani, who had been fighting their own guerrilla war. Together we began coordinating attacks on hegemony supply lines and isolated outposts. Small victories, but they proved the enemy could be hurt. Thane manipulated the display again, showing the gradual expansion of resistance, activities across several sectors. Red zones flickered to yellow as contested areas where neither side held complete control. The war has been at stalemate for the past 2 centuries. We can hurt them, but we can't defeat them. They control too much territory and have too many resources. Until now, Torres said, beginning to understand. Until now, Thane agreed. Humanity represents something unique in our experience. Most species, when faced with impossible odds, either surrender or retreat into defensive positions. You attack. When your colonies were burning, when your fleets were being destroyed, humans kept launching raids against hegemony installations. You turned defeat into harassment, retreat into regrouping for counterattack. The tactical displays showed recent human operations, including several that Torres hadn't known about. Refugee ships turned into improvised warships, striking at enemy. Supply convoys before disappearing into deep space. Colony survivors organizing resistance movements on occupied worlds. Even after the fall of major human settlements, scattered groups continued fighting with whatever weapons they could scavenge. The hegemony has never encountered guerrilla warfare on this scale, Reed explained. They're used to crushing organized resistance and then dealing with individual holdouts. But humans don't become individual holdouts. You form new groups, establish new command structures, adapt your tactics to available resources. You're a military strategist's nightmare because you refuse to follow predictable patterns. Torres found herself oddly proud of humanity's stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even though it had led them to the brink of extinction. But stubbornness alone isn't enough to win a war. No, Thane admitted. But stubbornness combined with architect technology and centuries of resistance experience might be. The hegemony has grown comfortable with their superiority. They haven't faced a real challenge to their control in generations. A coordinated uprising involving multiple species, led by humans who simply don't know when to quit, could shatter their entire system. The implications were staggering, not just survival for humanity, but liberation for hundreds of enslaved species across the galaxy. The chance to break chains that had bound civilizations for 1,000 years. What would this partnership look like? Torres asked carefully. Thane's smile was sharp and determined. Integration of human forces with existing architect cells. Technology transfer to upgrade your ships and weapons. Joint training programs to teach human officers advanced tactical concepts. Most importantly, coordination of resistance activities across the entire galaxy. You're talking about a full-scale rebellion. I'm talking about freedom, Admiral. For humanity, for us, for every species that dreams of choosing its own destiny among the stars. The hegemony has ruled through fear and overwhelming force for too long. It's time to show the galaxy that tyranny can be broken. Outside the command center windows, the asteroid field drifted in ancient silence, each rock potentially hiding weapons or factories or refugee populations. This was what the galaxy had become under hegemony rule, a place where free peoples had to hide in the darkness, fighting for the simple right to exist. But in the depths of that darkness, hope was stirring. Human determination meeting alien technology, two desperate species finding strength in each other's courage. The 1,000-year war was about to enter a new phase, and for the first time since the fall of Avalon, victory seemed possible. The debate had been raging for 6 hours in the converted cargo bay that served as humanity's emergency parliament. Representatives from every surviving human colony, ship captains who had lost their crews, civilian leaders who had watched their worlds burn, all of them struggling with the most important decision in human history. Admiral Torres sat at the head of the makeshift assembly, watching her people tear themselves apart over Captain Thane's offer. The architect proposal sat on the table between them like an unexploded bomb, its implications too vast for easy comprehension. Alliance with alien refugees who possessed technology beyond human dreams, but at a cost that would fundamentally change what humanity was. We're talking about abandoning everything that makes us human, argued Dr. Patricia Wells, the former civilian governor of New Geneva Colony. These enhancement procedures they're describing, we don't even know what they'll do to our people. Captain Walsh, his face still bearing burn scars from the battle at Haven Station, slammed his fist on the table. We know what the hegemony will do to our people. We've seen the reports from occupied worlds. At least this gives us a choice. The enhancement procedures were the sticking point. According to Thane, effective coordination with architect forces required human officers to undergo biological and technological modifications that would allow them to interface directly with alien systems. Enhanced reaction times, expanded sensory capabilities, neural links that could process data streams beyond normal human comprehension. The volunteers would still be human where it matters, Thane had explained during her presentation. Their personalities, their values, their fundamental nature would remain unchanged, but they would gain abilities that allow them to serve as bridges between our species. The word volunteers was doing a lot of work in that explanation. Everyone in the room knew that if humanity accepted this alliance, someone would have to step forward and sacrifice their purely human nature for the greater good. The question was who, and whether they had the right to make that choice for the entire species. Commander Liu stood up from her position near the back of the assembly. I've been thinking about this for days, and I keep coming back to one simple fact. We're already changing. The war has changed us. The things we've had to do, the sacrifices we've made. Are we really the same species that first reached for the stars 50 years ago? A murmur ran through the crowd. Liu was right, and everyone knew it. The gentle explorers who had established the first colonies beyond Sol were gone, replaced by hardened survivors who had learned to fight for every breath in an hostile galaxy. But there's a difference between adapting to circumstances and voluntarily altering our biology, Dr. Wells countered. Once we start down that path, where does it end? How many modifications before we're no longer human at all? Torres had been wrestling with the same question since Thane's initial proposal. The architect captain had been honest about the risks. The enhancement process was irreversible, and some volunteers might not survive the procedure. Those who did would be forever changed, gaining abilities that would set them apart from the rest of humanity. Admiral, came a voice from the middle of the assembly. Lieutenant Collins stood up, his young face serious beyond his years. Permission to speak? Torres nodded, curious to hear from the officer who had been humanity's first contact with the mysterious aliens. I've been working with the architect technical teams for the past 3 days, Collins began, learning about their systems, their methods, their technology. And I've realized something important. They're not asking us to become them. They're asking us to become ourselves, but better. He activated a portable display unit, showing technical specifications that most of the assembly wouldn't understand. The enhancement procedures don't replace human capabilities, they amplify them. Faster reflexes become superhuman reflexes. Pattern recognition becomes predictive analysis. Leadership instincts become tactical genius. Dr. Wells shook her head. Those are pretty words, Lieutenant, but you're still talking about fundamental alterations to human biology. Yes, I am, Collins replied firmly, and I'm volunteering to be among the first to undergo the process. The assembly erupted in shocked murmurs. Torres felt her heart skip a beat as she watched the young officer stand straighter, his decision clearly already made. Why? She asked quietly, her voice somehow carrying over the noise. Collins looked directly at her, his expression calm and determined. Because I've seen what we're up against, Admiral. I've studied the hegemony's capabilities, their tactics, their technology. Without enhancement, we're fighting with stone knives against plasma cannons. With it, we have a chance. More voices joined the discussion. Captain Harrison from the mining vessel, Prospector, stood up. My ship was converted to carry refugees when the hegemony hit the outer colonies. I watched families torn apart, children crying for parents who were already dead. If there's a chance to prevent that from happening to others, I'll take any risk necessary. Count me in too, added Commander Rodriguez, whose destroyer had been one of the few to survive the evacuation of New Terra. I've lost too many good people to alien weapons. If becoming something more than human gives us the tools to fight back effectively, then that's what we need to do. Torres watched as the mood in the assembly shifted. One by one, officers and civilians began expressing their willingness to accept the alliance, whatever the personal cost. The fear was still there, but it was being overwhelmed by something stronger, the desperate hope of finally having a real chance to strike back at their oppressors. Dr. Wells made one final attempt to voice the opposition. "You're all talking about volunteering yourselves, but what about the future generations? What about children who will be born into a humanity that's been fundamentally altered? Don't they deserve a choice?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Torres found herself thinking of her daughter back on Earth, probably studying for exams and worrying about normal teenage problems. What kind of world would that girl inherit? One where humanity cowered in their home system, slowly dying as the hegemony consolidated their control? Or one where humans had chosen to transform themselves into something capable of fighting for freedom? "Doctor," Torres said finally, "what choice will our children have if we don't survive long enough for them to be born?" The vote, when it came, was closer than Torres had expected, but decisive nonetheless. 73% in favor of accepting the Architect Alliance, including all the military representatives and most of the civilian leadership. The enhancement program would proceed with volunteers only, but there were more than enough people willing to undergo the process. Captain Thane had been waiting outside the assembly hall during the entire debate, respecting humanity's need to make this decision without alien influence. When Torres emerged to inform her of the vote, the architect captain's reaction was a mixture of relief and something that might have been admiration. "Your species continues to surprise me, Admiral. Most civilizations take months to reach such decisions if they can reach them at all. We don't have months," Torres replied simply. "The hegemony will be coming back in force, and when they do, we need to be ready." The next few weeks passed in a blur of frantic activity. The first group of volunteers underwent the enhancement process in architect medical facilities that looked more like temples than hospitals. Lieutenant Collins was among them, emerging from the procedure with eyes that seemed to hold starlight and reflexes that were almost too fast to follow. "It doesn't hurt," he reported to Torres after his recovery. "It's like suddenly being able to see colors that were always there but you were blind to them before. The tactical displays make sense now in ways I can't explain. I can feel the battle patterns, predict enemy movements before they happen." Similar reports came from the other enhanced humans. Captain Walsh described being able to interface directly with architect weapon systems, controlling entire squadrons, with thought alone. Commander Liu spoke of sensing enemy intentions through electromagnetic patterns that her enhanced nervous system could now detect. But the real test came when the hegemony returned to the Kepler system in overwhelming force. 300 ships this time, including massive dreadnoughts that could crush asteroids with their main weapons. They had come to eliminate the mysterious threat that had humiliated their forces at Haven Station. What they found instead was humanity's first real counterattack. Enhanced human officers coordinating with architect cells across multiple star systems, striking at enemy supply lines while the main fleet was committed to the Kepler assault. Guerrilla tactics refined over 1,000 years of resistance now guided by human instincts for unpredictable warfare. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with the hegemony fleet in full retreat, having lost over half their ships to an enemy they couldn't pin down or predict. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy received proof that the supposedly invincible conquerors could be beaten. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Defiance, watching the enemy survivors limp away through hyperspace. Beside her, Lieutenant Collins monitored tactical displays with enhanced senses that could track individual ships across light years of space. "What happens now?" she asked Captain Thane, who had remained aboard the human flagship throughout the battle. "Now we show the galaxy what freedom looks like," Thane replied. "Every enslaved species, every conquered world, every refugee hiding in the darkness, they all need to see that resistance is possible, that the hegemony can be defeated." Torres nodded, understanding the magnitude of what lay ahead. This victory was just the beginning. The real war, the one that would determine whether free will or absolute order ruled the galaxy, was just getting started. But for the first time since the aliens had darkened Earth's skies, humanity was No longer running, they were no longer hiding. They had chosen to transform themselves into something new, something dangerous, something that could stand against tyranny and win. The strange warship that had decloaked to join their fight had offered them a choice between comfortable extinction and dangerous glory. True to form, humanity had chosen to fight, to change, to become whatever they needed to be to preserve freedom among the stars. The 1,000-year war was entering its final phase, and the galaxy would never be the same.